The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello. I'm Barbara Levin, the Executive Director of Neurofibromatosis Mid-Atlantic. Welcome to Help with Your Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. I want to thank you for joining us and for this very exciting and informative program. We're very happy to be sponsoring this educational event. NF Mid-Atlantic is a nonprofit organization based in Baltimore. We've been around for 34 years, and we remain committed to our founding principles of supporting people with neurofibromatosis, their families, their caregivers, their circles, and anyone who has an interest in NF. We have embarked on a special effort this year to help combat the isolation that can occur when someone is facing an incurable disease, such as neurofibromatosis. A few housekeeping items. On your pane, you have a question pane in one of your side areas. Simply type in your question and click Send. At the end of the presentation, we will do a question and answer session and take as many questions as we have time for. I will be muting everyone while Gerry speaks, but feel free to write your questions. By tomorrow, I will be hosting the complete presentation on our website for download, www.nfmidatlantic.org. It will also be on our YouTube channel, Great Gabby Dog. You can review all our archived videos there or on our website. A few quick items. Our next webinar will be October 23rd, 2012 at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Optic Pathway Glioma in Neurofibromatosis, presented by Dr. Michael Fisher. You can sign up at our website. We've just added a new webinar for December 7th, 2012 on pediatric neuropsychological testing in neurofibromatosis. Once again, our website is www.nfmidatlantic.org. For those of you in the Baltimore, Washington area, we'll be hosting a night in Florence on November 11, 2012. It will be a wonderful evening of food, music, and socializing with your NF friends and others. Please visit our website for information and to RSVP. I need to mention that NF Mid-Atlantic survives solely on your generosity. If you appreciate this educational program, please consider a donation in any amount. Go to www.nfmidatlantic.org. We've made donating very easy. Now, I'm so excited to present Gerry Fisher to you. Gerry has a master's in social work and is an experienced counselor and life coach. He's worked for years with anxiety disorders in his counseling practice and is a good friend of NF Mid-Atlantic. If you will indulge us for one moment, I'm going to turn this webinar over to Gerry. Thank you all for attending. And Gerry, you're all set.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction, Barbara. I was chuckling to myself when you were saying that the presentation is going to be exciting, so I promise to do my very best to be exciting this morning. But anyway, thank you very much for the people attending this morning. Good morning to you all, and hello to all of the people who will be watching this later once the webinar is recorded. What I thought I would do first of all is to follow what Barbara had just said and tell you a little bit more about myself. Barbara gave a terrific overview of my professional background, but let's move on to the first slide, and we'll just talk a little bit more about where I've been. Counseling and life coaching was actually a career change for me. I started off working in the high-tech industry and software, and I went back to school, and I decided that the best way to be a counselor, or the way that fit best to me, was to get a master's degree in social work, and I did that in the mid-90s. I've worked in mental health counseling and was a licensed counselor for about a decade. I worked in an area that was called community mental health, which is just a fancy term for the network of services that the government provides for people who have mental illness and mental conditions that need some serious attention and serious resources and support from the state. So I did work with people who had very serious conditions such as schizophrenia, major depressive disorder, and bipolar disorder, and all sorts of situations like that, as well as things that are less serious but still can make life difficult for people, like obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety disorders, and more. 10 years ago, I decided to branch out on my own and become a life coach. And so I gave you a little bit on this slide, a little bit of a feel for some of the ways that I focus my work as a life coach. Life coaching in general is about helping people to understand where they are now and being very clear as to how they want to develop their life and where they want to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now, and then creating a plan and executing it so people can be happier and reach their personal goals quicker and easier. But the one thing that I wanted to point out on this slide, because I think it's very, very applicable to the topic that we're going to be talking about today, is that no matter who I'm talking with, the reason why people come to see me is they feel that they're stuck. There's something that they want to achieve in their life. They want to change careers or save more money or lose weight. It could even be something like they want to date more, or they're a little shy and they'd like to meet people. And it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if the goal is very, very complicated or if the goal is something that's very common that most of us want to do. I always start with my clients and say, in order for you to be able to reach your goals, you have to begin by relaxing and concentrating. So that's a very big theme to the work that I do. I do that work daily. And if you think about it, if you're too relaxed, then you're going to be like a surfer. I don't know many people watch old movies, but whenever I think of somebody too relaxed, I always think of Sean Penn in that old movie, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. It's like, hey, dude. So being too relaxed can be a problem. It means that you won't have any goals and you won't do anything with your life. But concentrating too much can be a big problem, too, because it can really stress people out. And it can cause them to make a lot of mistakes, be overwhelmed, and to hurry through things. And so I really think that in my life coaching practice, I'm really helping people to balance being both relaxed and concentrating. And I think you're going to see some of those themes as we move through the information today, talking about obsessive compulsive disorder. So let's move on. And so I thought I would start by telling some stories. I love to tell stories, but I promise to keep it under control. The first story I thought I would tell about myself, and the point to these stories is I'm going to jump to one of the final points on this slide. The final point is mental health and mental illness, they're a continuum. And what I mean by that is that when you think of something like obsessing and being compulsive, there are really light forms of it that really aren't very serious. And so I'm going to be a good sport and share with you that actually I can be kind of obsessive and compulsive in my life. It's certainly nothing that needs medicating. It's nothing that really interferes with my life, but it's a good example of something on the low end of the continuum that a lot of people have to deal with. And then all the way on the other end of the continuum is when the obsessions and the compulsions get to be so intense and so intrusive that they make it hard for you to live your life. They make it hard to work, hard to be in relationships, and just hard to function. And so that's what I mean by health and illness being on a continuum. And I think that the methods I'm going to share with you today would be wherever you are in that continuum, the methods that I'll share later will help you to turn the symptoms down, to really reduce them, to make them less frequent and less intense. So anyway, let me get to my story. That basically I've noticed that when I get a little bit nervous in my life, you know, it's normal. All of us will go through some stressful times. It could be something simple like moving, or there's some extra stress at work, or certainly with neurofibromatosis there might be some stress related to your condition. So when I get stressed out, I notice that I start doing things like I'll take a paper towel and start rubbing the table to clean off the dust, or I'll go up to a table and I'll start to move the items on the table so that they're lined up better, and I kind of align them properly. And so my husband likes to joke about this. My husband happens to be a medicating nurse clinician, so he actually treats mental illness with medication. And one of the medications that's used for obsessive compulsive disorder is called Luvox. And so whenever he sees me getting nervous and picking up a towel and starting to clean or starting to rearrange things on the desk, he'll say, "Hey, Luvox boy is in the house." And so I'll chuckle and he'll chuckle. And it's our way of just making fun of my little tendency to be obsessive and to have a compulsion. Now, the obsession basically is I'm noticing that things are dusty or things are out of line, and then the compulsion is if I do dust and if I do put things into order, it temporarily makes me feel better. But let me share, so that's an example of obsessive compulsive behavior that's on the low end of the scale, that's really not going to interfere with anybody's life. Let me go on the opposite end of the scale and read a little story to you about somebody who had obsessive compulsive disorder and it really, really interfered with his ability to live. Howard Hughes was dining with actress Jane Greer at Ciro's on Sunset Strip in Los Angeles one evening in 1947. At one point in the meal, he excused himself to go to the restroom. To Greer's amazement, he did not return for an hour and a half. You heard that right, an hour and a half. When he finally reappeared, she was astonished to see that he was soaking wet from head to toe. "What on earth happened to you?" she asked. "Well," Hughes said, "I spilled some ketchup on my shirt and pants, and I had to wash them out in the sink." He then let them dry for a while, hanging them over one of the toilet stalls. Once he put his clothes back on, he explained, "I couldn't leave the bathroom because I couldn't touch the door handle. I had to wait for somebody else to come in." According to Peter H. Brown, co-author with Pat Brodsky of Howard Hughes, The Untold Story, Jane Greer never went out with Howard Hughes again. So again, that's an example of the types of behaviors and the symptoms that actually get to a certain intensity where it interferes with somebody's ability to live their life. So let's move on. Those are some stories, hopefully to help you to see that there are a range of symptoms and to give you a little bit of a feel for obsessive compulsive behaviors and disorders. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I hope it becomes clear why I'm doing this. I wanted to make it clear or call out that obsessive compulsive disorder is an anxiety disorder. So I thought it might be helpful to talk about anxiety disorders in general, and then what I'll do is I'll bring it back around to define OCD, and then finally I'll cover a 4-step method contained in a very good self-help book that you can use to really reduce your obsessions and compulsions and to feel a lot more relief from them. So let's start with anxiety disorders. I put medicine at the top of the list because it's just a very helpful, common way that many people deal with anxiety when they start to get to the point that the anxiety is interfering with people's lives. So it's common for people to meet with a medicating clinician and to talk about the level of anxiety and the type of anxiety that they're facing, and it's common for a person to be prescribed medication. And there are different types of medication. Some types of medication are designed to be taken once a day, and they have to build up over a couple of weeks, and they can lower the intensity of the anxiety. And then other medications are designed to be taken PRN, which is just a fancy term for when you need it. So when you're feeling the anxiety, you can take the medication, and it should calm you and make you feel better. The second bullet describes a second approach, and this approach is usually used in counseling. It could be mental health counseling or some forms of life coaching, and it's also the technique that's used in most self-help books, and it's called cognitive behavioral treatment, or CBT, and you might have heard of it. And so what I did on this slide is I just added a few bullets to give you a feel for the types of things that typical CBT approaches emphasize in terms of what you can do to lower your anxiety in general. And as you skim the items on the list, I'm sure that many of them are familiar to you. I don't think I have to describe deep breathing very much. Mindfulness is a technique. I actually did another video for the Neurofibromatosis organization where I went into great detail describing mindfulness. And you can also go to my website. There's a video there where I talk about mindfulness and how to do it. I'm going to come back to exposure treatment. I'll tell you a little story that can illustrate what that's all about. Adjusting your self-talk, paying attention to the thoughts that go through your mind and changing them, refocusing, and changing your point of view are all really good methods of addressing the anxiety. The brief story I'll tell will be about systematic desensitization or exposure treatment. And the basic idea is that when people have a really intense fear of something, what can be very therapeutic is to expose that person very, very slowly and very gradually until they get used to the thing that they're afraid of and that they can relax and their anxiety should go down and in some cases disappear. So the example that I use is, let's say somebody is afraid of a bridge, or they're afraid of bridges in general. And so the first thing that I might do if I'm doing exposure treatment is I might show them pictures of bridges in my office. And as the person would get very upset, I would help them to breathe deeply and calm down. And we would repeat this exercise until they could be very calm and look at pictures of bridges. Then the next step is we might go, say, 100 yards away from a bridge and look at the bridge from a distance. And then I would coach the person to do deep breathing and to relax until the person could look at bridges from a distance and not feel much fear. And I think you're getting the feel for it now. The next step is we might go 10 feet from the bridge, and then I'd help the person calm down. And then I'd make them or assist them take one step onto the bridge, and then we would do exercises to calm them down. And then we'd go 30 feet onto the bridge, 50 feet, all the way into the middle of the bridge, until they're practiced enough and they're able to get onto the bridge and maintain a calm and a peace and not be afraid of bridges anymore. But the thing that I want to call out with this is I want you to notice the emphasis placed on doing, actually getting in there and doing something, as opposed to thinking something through or analyzing it or telling stories about it or telling how you feel about it. These techniques are about doing, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. So moving on about anxiety disorders in general, again, we talked about cognitive behavioral treatment a little bit. It's proven by research to either reduce or eliminate anxiety disorders. The summary of behaviors are at the bottom. I think we covered most of that. And I like the last bullet under the summary of behaviors, that these techniques work only if you practice, practice, practice. Sometimes I think certainly there are times when people need to be on medication for their entire lives for certain conditions, but sometimes I think that our medical system uses medication because it's just quicker and easier. But if you're willing to put the work in and you're willing to practice and make something a habit, you practice every single day, you can actually achieve quite a bit of health just by doing these cognitive behavioral techniques. Hoarders. Another true confession of mine is that when I'm surfing and channel surfing on the TV, every once in a while when I see the Hoarders TV show, I'll stop. But the point I wanted to make here is that I don't know if you've noticed this, but when the counselors are working with the hoarders, the counselors who try to convince the hoarder that what they're doing doesn't make sense and to try to argue rationally or get them to debate logically, I want you to notice that that never works. And let me repeat the key word, never. So I think it's really important to understand that when people are in a very anxious state, it never works to try to convince them that they shouldn't be anxious, if you think about it. So that's very, very important moving forward to understand about anxiety disorders, is that it's really a lot of talk therapy or a lot of techniques for talking things through don't work very well with anxiety, and they don't work with things like hoarding. And then that last bullet is if you notice the episodes of Hoarders where things actually go pretty well, what are the common features of the person who's able to actually make some progress with hoarding? Well, they need to be brave enough to face their fear. So you basically have to be in the presence of that thing that is making you nervous, and you have to avoid doing that ritualistic or calming behavior. So in my example of the bridges, the person had to put themselves near a bridge, and then they had to experience calming down. All right? And people have to act differently until the fear goes away, and there is a self-talk part where people are reassuring themselves or looking at things differently. Okay, let's move on. And then I'll just end with this. I won't spend too much time on this slide, but I've noticed in my work as a mental health counselor and also as a life coach that people who are suffering from anxiety, they kind of put the cart before the horse. They're trying to over-control something that they can't control. So they're focused on trying to get to perfection or eliminating all future problems, which would be just impossible to control. But then there are things that they can actually control, and they're completely ignoring them. So they're ignoring the breathing techniques and the self-talk and the behaviors, the CBT techniques that can actually help. So I think that with any kind of anxiety situation, we want to get that cart and put it behind the horse, and you want to start paying attention to the things that you actually can control and shift away and de-emphasize those things that really are out of your control. Okay, thank you for your patience. I know that was not directly related to OCD, but I hope you'll see the benefit of it as we move into what is OCD. So I'm going to move through the first couple of slides fairly quickly because this is very, very close to the medical definition that you'll find in a counselor or psychiatrist diagnostic and medical manual. But I'll go through it fairly quickly, and then I have some slides later that describe the same thing, only it uses a little bit more plain language. But here's the clinical definition of an obsession. So what is OCD? Well, OCD starts with obsessive thoughts. Obsessions are thoughts or impulses or images that are inappropriate or cause distress. So the basic idea is that you're living your life, and all of a sudden there's this thought, this notion, something enters your mind that doesn't make a lot of sense. It just kind of comes in while you're doing something completely different, and it's upsetting. It's not a pleasant thought. It's not like all of a sudden you have this, you're at work and all of a sudden you're thinking of flowers and you go, oh, how pretty. It has to be some kind of thought that is disruptive. It doesn't make sense given what you're doing, and you don't feel good about it. What they say in the diagnostic manual is that this is not the same thing as just being very worried about real-life problems. So going back to the original example, if you're worried about work and you think, how am I going to meet my deadline by next Wednesday, and you start to sweat and feel very, very panicky, that's not OCD, because you're actually worried about something that makes sense. It's just an excessive, it's a reasonable concern, and there's excessive worry about it, but that's not OCD. So there may be, when you have these thoughts, you're just going about your life and all of a sudden the thoughts come in, usually people are trying to stop the thoughts or get rid of them or clear them out. So that's an indicator that people are obsessing. And people are very clear that these are just thoughts. So it's not a situation where they think that they're Napoleon or they think that there are pink elephants in the room. That's a different situation. But the people are very clear that these are thoughts and it's not reality. All right, moving on. Compulsions. Now, notice at the top of the slide I said and or compulsions. And the reason why I put that is because you can be diagnosed with OCD if you have obsessions only and there are no compulsions. However, a lot of times when people they have these intrusive thoughts and they're very upsetting, there's some kind of ritual or behavior that people use to try to soothe themselves or to feel better. So compulsions are repetitive, rigidly applied behaviors. Examples would be hand washing, ordering, checking, but they could also be mental behaviors, so things like counting and reciting things, or prayers. And it's not just any kind of prayer, but it's a prayer that's very rigid and it's done intensely or maybe multiple times, and there's a strong belief that the prayer will make the bad obsessions go away. So it's kind of like prayer gone wrong as opposed to praying done well. Behaviors that reduce stress, or so there's this belief that if you do the ritual, so if you clean or you wash your hands, or if you keep a lot of things in your house, that it will prevent that bad thing that you're worried about happening. You'll avoid what was going on in the obsessive thought. And the person understands that the thinking and the behavior is unreasonable. Whoops. And then continuing with the clinical definition, it's this combination of obsessing and the ritualistic or compulsive behavior. It's really time consuming. I mean, let's go back to the Howard Hughes story. It took him an hour and a half to go to the bathroom. So when people are thinking this way, when the thoughts are coming in and they're doing all these rituals, it really interferes with their ability to live their lives. And so as typical with a lot of medical diagnoses, you just want to make sure that there isn't some other mental disorder or substance abuse that's making the picture more complicated. So we can get a snapshot and say, truly, this person does have a problem with obsessions and compulsions. So as I promised, I thought what I would do is just put it into plain English. Essentially what happens is that people get locked into a really disturbing thought. The thought comes in, and it's really hard to push it out of your brain. And then what people do is they do some kind of activity that gives them a temporary relief, and they feel a little bit better after they perform the ritual. It's way out of control, and it interferes with your life. So that's the basic definition of obsessive compulsive disorder. So we'll move on. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I thought it might be helpful for you to skim some of the examples of different types of obsessions. And I think you've heard some of these things in some of the stories that we've told before. You know, somebody who washes their hands quite a bit, like Howard Hughes, would be concerned with dirt and contamination. And we talked a little bit about hoarding. So people who hoard would be very worried that if they didn't keep everything, that they might need something later and that something bad might happen if they don't have quick access to it. But this gives you a longer list of the things that people might be facing who obsess. And the next slide, again, I won't go into this in great detail, but these are examples of compulsions. So these are the behaviors that people will do that will give them temporary relief, thinking that they're preventing or delaying the bad thing that they're worried about in the obsessions. Brain lock. Okay, finally, we've gotten to the main point of the presentation today, which is what can you do to help yourself? What can anybody with obsessive compulsive disorder do to help? Now, we already talked about medication, and we'll talk a little more about medication later, but the best resource that I found for helping with obsessive compulsive disorder is a book, and the book is called Brain Lock. It's also one of the most clever names of a book that I've encountered. And also, I don't know if this would be interesting to you, but I do read a lot of self-help books, and I actually don't like them very much. I find them to be very repetitive and kind of tedious. But Brain Lock is one of the better ones. It's actually one of the easier ones to read. But I'm going to give you an overview of the basics for Brain Lock. The author is Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz. Again, as the second bullet says, I'm a fan of this book. I think it's actually well written and it's interesting to read. There is a 4-step method for unlocking your brain and moving on with your life, and we'll go over that in this presentation. Brain lock is a CBT technique, and if you remember earlier, I said that CBT is a research-proven method for taking care of all anxiety disorders. So there's good research behind this that it can be very helpful. And finally, when you're done with this webinar, and if you'd like to go see a little tutorial on how to do the 4 steps, I've included here a link so that you can go onto the internet and watch a video that'll give you a little bit more information from the actual author of this book. So I hope you find that helpful later on. I wanted to read this to you because I thought it was very important that these are quotes from the book, and all that Dr. Schwartz is really saying here is that they've actually done the research. They've run experiments and they've gotten the data, and they know that if somebody practices the 4 steps in Brain Lock, that it actually changes their brain chemistry. So sometimes people out there will say, well, if you have a chemical imbalance, you know, you just need to get onto medication. And so I just wanted to put out there that we have good medical research here that behavior can change your brain chemistry as well. It's just that medication can do it quicker. And certainly if somebody is suffering really terribly and they need some relief quickly, medication is very helpful. So you can think of the 4-step method that the more you do the 4-step method, the more you practice and the more you make these habits, the less medication you'll need. So in some cases you may be able to reduce your medication, and then in other cases you may be able to come off of medication altogether, because this behavior, changing your behavior, does affect your brain chemistry. The theme, okay, what's it all about? What's this four-step thing, and why does Gerry like this book? Well, here are the basic notions in the book. The book makes a big deal out of you can really get into a worse jam by worrying about your worry. So it's kind of like, you know, putting ice cream on top of ice cream on top of ice cream, that you already have ice cream, you don't need more of it. So really pay attention to a tendency that some people have with OCD where they worry that they're worrying too much. And so you want to remember all the way back to the beginning of the presentation, you want to relax and concentrate, and you want to make a deal with yourself that you actually don't. You want to address your OCD. You want to pay attention to it. You want to relax and concentrate on giving it the treatment that it requires. And that would be the opposite of worrying about your worrying. And then the other two bullets are basically about a theme that I talked about earlier, which is that the best treatment that we know about through scientific research is that you can get through anxiety, but the way to do it is you have to change what you do. This is about doing. It's not about knowing. It's not about waiting. It's not like some magic thing will come down and help you. It's that you actually have to practice and do things. So let's move on so we can get to actually the 4 steps. 4 steps. So here they are. In the book, Brain Lock, they ask you to practice relabeling the obsessions and compulsions. So you want to relabel, reattribute, refocus, and revalue. And we'll go through each of those 4. So let's take a look at relabel. I think that let's jump to the example, because I don't know about you, but I learn better when I see examples of things. So we'll jump down to the example and then come back to the bullets. But in the example, what you want to do is you want to take a thought like, I feel like I need to wash my hands again even though it doesn't make sense to me. All right, that's a typical way that somebody with OCD might think about what's happening to them and how they might address the obsession. And you want to switch it over to, I'm having a compulsive urge. That compulsion is bothering me. All right? So that's the kind of changing of the label. You change what you're calling it. So the other label is, I have a feeling that I need to wash my hands. It doesn't make sense. And the new label is, this is a compulsive urge and it's bugging me. It's a new way to think about it, new words to apply to it. So going back to the bullets, you want to switch from an obsessive thought and then switch it. You want to switch from that and just basically say, no, 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 no. This is just my OCD. This isn't the truth, and I'm not going to be tricked by this anymore. Those are the themes to what you want to do. So switch the label. It's like, no, no, no. This is just an obsession. This isn't helpful, and it's bothering me. 2, reattribute. So what might come up then is, well, why does this keep bothering me? Where is this coming from? And so you want to attribute, or you want to answer that question by saying, I have a medical condition. It's OCD. It's mental noise. It's annoying. My obsessions and compulsions are related to a chemical imbalance in my brain. What I'm doing on these slides is I'm giving you all the words in quotes are just examples of how you might change your thinking and new thinking that you might want to practice. But use the words that make sense to you. You need to feel comfortable with these words, and you need to be able to think them and believe them. So these words here will give you an idea of what you need to do to reattribute, and then just use the words that work best for you. So it's basically, no, no, I know where this comes from. This isn't some weird thing. This isn't the truth. This is just a medical condition that I have. And then down at the bottom, it leads to the question, well, what can you do about it? And that brings us to step 3. Step 3 is refocus. So it basically means you're not going to solve the problem of the obsession or the desire to do an activity or the compulsion to try to take the pressure off the obsession. You're not going to rethink it. You're just going to remove your attention and then place your attention on something constructive. So something constructive, don't overthink it. It can be something simple. It could be taking a shower. It could be calling your sister. It could be going out and gardening. It could be cleaning up your closet. It could be focusing on something that you have to do at work. But just take your attention, remove it from the OCD, and then place it on something that actually you would like to have done in your life. The last bullet there is something, it's a quote that I took directly from the book, and the author says that when people do that, when they refocus, the feeling that most OCD people report is that they feel like they've shifted gears. And so they shift gears into thinking and doing something very differently. Okay? Down at the bottom, I mentioned that there are a lot of books and a lot of resources on the internet that have to do with, or that would include a list of activities that you can do to distract yourself. Distraction is usually what it's called when people say remove your attention from something and place your attention on something else. And so please do feel free to go out on the internet or look up any books, and if you find a list of distracting behaviors, comb through the list and go through it and find the behaviors that you would enjoy most and that would work well for you. And it might take a little experimentation. You might have to try 2 or 3 or 4 before you find the ones that work well for you. Then finally, and I hope you like my pictures there, you want to change not just the words, but you want to change the value. That before, when you were a victim of OCD, it felt like your obsessions were the truth, right? And so the final step, step 4, is you want to change the value, and you want to say, not only is it not true, it's garbage. All right? You want to make a value judgment about these obsessions and these compulsions, and you want to devalue them. You want to say they're junky, they're garbage, they're noise. And I wanted to throw in funny, because if you remember the story about how I can get a little obsessive compulsive when I'm feeling nervous and stressed, one of the things that my husband and I do is we joke about it. So anything that you can mock or make fun of or tell jokes about, that's going to defuse it, and it's going to send the message that this isn't very important, this is just a big joke, it's just silly. So anything that you can do to revalue it would be very helpful. And those are the 4 steps. Now, what my clients often say to me is they say, oh, okay, that's really easy, yeah. And then they come in a few weeks and they say, oh, you know, it was a lot harder to do than I thought it would be. So remember, this isn't about knowing about these 4 steps. It's about doing it every single day. And I'm clicking my hands here, I'm snapping my fingers, because it's this idea that now that you know how to do it, you need to practice it. And the more you practice it daily, the better you're going to get at this. And then you should be able to see some effects of this probably in 2 or 3 months. You'll notice that the obsessions are less frightening and that the desire to do the activity will go way, way, way down. So the final word I kind of already launched into my wrap-up here. It's what you do that counts. And just to repeat, with some of my clients, they like to say, I know, Gerry, I know, you don't have to tell me, I know. And so what I'll say to them is I say, I'm not really concerned with what you know. We have to really focus on what you're doing and how can we get you to do more. And so anything that you can do, any coaching you can get, or if keeping a journal would help you, or having a close friend or family member that you can confide in and you can get some peer support, anything at all that you can do that will help you to keep practicing would be very, very helpful. And focus on what you're doing and not on just knowing about it. This is an activity. And so let's sum it up. Let's sum up the whole presentation today. Obsessive compulsive disorder is an anxiety disorder. CBT is very effective. We know this from research. It can definitely help with these conditions, and it will either help you to reduce or stop altogether the medication that you take for anxiety. The 3rd bullet I think is key. Don't even go there. Don't even try to convince yourself to stop obsessing, because it's not logical. You'll never out-argue or out-debate yourself that the obsession is wrong. It'll never happen. Instead, go to the 4th bullet, which is use the 4-step method and practice, 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 relabeling, reattributing, refocusing, and revaluing. And like anything that you practice, the more you do it, the easier it will get over time. And then in a few months, you'll notice that the obsessions and the compulsions will be less frequent. You won't be encountering them as much, and they'll be less intense. And the only thing I'll say about that last bullet is that I think with a lot of mental health work and a lot of skill building, what I've noticed is that it's almost impossible to get rid of something. But what you can do is you can turn it way, way, way down. So if you're listening to a radio or TV set, you can use the remote or something and turn the volume really, really, really down low so it doesn't bother you as much. And so it may be that the obsessions and the compulsions never go away 100%, or maybe they'll kind of pop up a little bit when things are stressful, just like a zit. Sorry for the disgusting analogy, but that's kind of what it's like. But using the four-step method and the techniques from Brain Lock, it'll help you to be able to, when it does pop up like that, you can just you can apply the techniques and you can have them fade away, and they'll be less annoying in your life to the point where you'll be more like me, Luvox boy, where it won't be that intense and it won't be affecting you so much, and it's something that you can really live with. And that's what I would wish for all of you folks, is a life that's calmer, easier, where it's easier for you to go out and reach your goals and to have a happy life, and you don't have to deal with these junky obsessions and these time-wasting compulsions. So I hope this was helpful. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I think at this point we will go back to what I will do is I'll go back to listening to Barbara, and I'll take some of your questions.
Well, thank you so much, Gerry. You never disappoint. I do want to apologize. I understand I have a little bit of an echo on my end. Apparently I need to upgrade my technology. I hope that won't be too much of a problem. We do have a number of questions, and people should feel free to add more. We'll get to as many as we can if you can handle my echo. Our first question, Gerry, is from Theresa, who has a 6-year-old with NF1, OCD, and anxiety, and she needs some pointers for how to deal with her child.
Okay, well, hello, Theresa. Thank you for listening. I remember when I was reading through Brain Lock does a really good job of saying that there are certain techniques that work better for adults and that there are certain things that don't work very well for children. So my first recommendation is that you get the book and that you read it. The second thing that would be helpful would be to watch the video for the four-step method. But I think that I can give you a general answer as best I know. I'm not an expert at working with children, but the limited work that I have done with children, it tends to de-emphasize a lot of talk and a lot of thinking, and it tends to emphasize doing. So for example, when I would work with an adult, we might want to talk through things and talk about how people are feeling and talk about what something might mean to them. And when I'm working with children, what I do is I usually work through play. I work through drawing. I know some counselors, they actually have a sandbox setting in their office, so they have or they might have a lot of dolls. So children like to draw. They like to play with dolls, maybe trucks, and play therapy is very, very helpful. So what you want to do is you want to take these same techniques and you want to weave it or incorporate it into a game or into a drawing. So for example, let's go through the 4 steps. You want to relabel, reattribute, refocus, revalue. So the first one is relabel. So you might want to have one doll that is things feel like they're going to be bad, and the other, disaster doll or disaster man or disaster woman, and then the other doll would be Doctor Woman, and Doctor Woman knows that it's a medical condition, and then Doctor Woman is able to get Disaster Woman off of the, she takes her out of the room or locks her in a box, and so weave it into a game. So take all of the types of things that we did here where we're relabeling, reattributing, refocusing, and revaluing, and make it into different characters, different toys, and play the thing out. And the only other thing I'll add is that when I've done counseling with children, I like to ask the children to create a story in which they're very powerful and they win in the end. So you want to try to construct a drawing, picture drawing, or a play where the child the child is a superhero, or the child is super mom or super adult woman, and that she manages to win in the end. And winning would be that she gets to go have fun and gets to play with her friends, and she doesn't waste a lot of time with things that make her feel bad and that take away her time. Weave it into a game. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Gerry. we're going to try a little bit of a different microphone on my end. I hope it will help. You spoke about medication, Luvox. Who should be diagnosing OCD, and who should be prescribing?
Well, I think that there's been a change in the past 20 years. Recently, what people are asking is that family physicians try to be aware when there's an anxiety disorder or a depression disorder, and so oftentimes the family doctor, I'm spacing out on the modern term for that, the primary care physician. So a primary care physician oftentimes will diagnose simple anxiety and also depression. However, in my personal opinion, now keep in mind I am not a medicating clinician, so I'm not licensed and I don't have a medical background. But with everything I've seen, I don't think that primary care physicians really understand a lot of these diagnoses. So they either have trouble in the maintenance phase, understanding how these conditions develop or how the medications need to be adjusted over time, or they don't understand some of the more complex conditions, and I think OCD is a more complex condition. So therefore, to answer your question, I would recommend that you go to a psychiatrist or to a medicating nurse clinician. So those are the two people who are licensed to diagnose and prescribe medication. I should also say that the people who are licensed to prescribe medication who specialize in prescribing this kind of medication, that can change from state to state. So if we have people listening from outside of Maryland, I'm very familiar with Massachusetts. I'm learning more about Maryland. I've been here 3 years. But you need to check with your particular state regulations about who the specialists are. But the short list would be psychiatrists and medicating nurse clinicians.
Thank you. We have another question. Sorry, thank you. We have another question. Can OCD heal itself? Is it temporary?
No. Well, let me pause, because I like to have a very broad mind. I think that the most common, I think the broadest thing that I can say about this is that you can either wait to see if it goes away on its own, which is highly unlikely, or you can do something about it. The problem with doing nothing is that, and I think this is true of all anxiety disorders, is that and we'll go to the woman or the man who's afraid of the bridge, every time that person avoids a bridge, the fear of bridges gets stronger. So if this person is waiting around to suddenly not be afraid of bridges, every time they avoid a bridge, the condition gets worse. They avoid a bridge again, the condition gets worse. So in the case of OCD, every single time I clean a table or I recite my ritual and I count from 100 down to 1 backwards, it reinforces the idea that I need to do this to make sure that disastrous things don't happen, and the condition gets stronger and stronger and stronger and more entrenched. If you want more information on this, what I would recommend that you do is check out what happened to Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes got to the point where he became a hermit, and his life really was destroyed by OCD. So on the one hand, I want to say there's a slim chance that it would go away on its own, and on the other hand, everything I've seen with anxiety disorders is they tend to get worse, and in some cases they really, really crush people's lives. So I do not recommend that people wait for it to go away on its own. Especially take a look at the 4 steps I just presented to you. Those are not hard. It's not terribly difficult to practice relabeling, reattributing, refocusing, and revaluing. So why not do something about it?
Thank you. I think we have time for one final question, and that is from someone in our audience who said, when I first became ill with NF, I would get up during the night and rearrange my furniture, and then I'd continually wash all my dishes 2 or 3 times a day. Is this a form of OCD?
Probably. I think, again, I'll go back to the fact that I'm a life coach right now, so I'm not a licensed clinician. So in order to get a firm diagnosis, it might be helpful to go and meet with a counselor or meet with a psychiatrist. But it sure does fit the definition of what we've been talking about. But I think what I would do is I would retreat back to an earlier slide that basically said the challenge of any anxiety disorder is that people don't focus on things they can control, and that they over-focus on things that they can't control. And I think in particular with OCD, I think that especially in this case that's being described, it sounds as if worry about the neurofibromatosis, because that's something that nobody can do anything about. It's a condition that's there, and we can't erase the condition or we can't eliminate it. So the anxiety has nowhere to go. However, we can rearrange furniture, we can wash dishes, so I think it gives the person a feeling that they're doing something about something that they're worried about when actually they aren't. And so I think that the way to address this would be to use the four-step method. And the key is when you have the impulse to wash dishes or rearrange your furniture, what you want to do is you want to resist that temptation. You want to revalue that as a junky impulse, that it doesn't really do any good. And you want to go off and you want to do another behavior that actually will do something that you'll enjoy and that will really contribute to your life. And then finally, I would say that there's some anxiety about the neurofibromatosis, and it would be helpful to work with somebody to deal with that anxiety directly so it doesn't get pushed off into compulsive behavior.
Thank you. I think, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank all of you, all of our audience, for taking this time to listen and to ask questions. And mostly, I certainly want to thank Gerry Fisher for a wonderful presentation. I know I learned an incredible amount. I want to reiterate that the complete presentation will be on our website. I would check by tomorrow, certainly by Monday, at www.nfmidatlantic.org. And it will be also on our YouTube channel. We will tweet this at NF Mid-Atlantic, and we will put it on our Facebook page as well. Don't forget that you can join us October 23rd for optic pathway glioma in neurofibromatosis. And on December 7th, we will be having neuropsychological testing in pediatric NF. That has not been posted yet, but we will. Hope you can all join us for A Night in Florence on November 11th. And again, a final plea that NF Mid-Atlantic does survive on your generosity. If you appreciate this educational program, let's make sure they continue and consider a donation in any amount. I want to thank everybody for their attention this morning, and we hope you'll join us for the next one. And thank you, Gerry. Gerry Fisher, so much. Thank you.
You're very welcome.